formula is negative b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac all over 2a.
So what do you think we are going to be learning today? You got it, the quadratic formula. So far, we have learned 3 algebraic methods that can be used to solve a quadratic equation. We learned how to use factoring in the zero product property, okay? Now, the only hiccup with that is that it only works when your quadratic equation can be factored. And we know that not all quadratic equations are able to be factored. So we need another way to solve. We learned that we can solve by completing the square. That was section 9.4. Completing the square does work for all quadratic equations, but if a isn't 1 and you end up with a bunch of fractions, the process becomes a lot more difficult than we would prefer. So we have a third way that we are going to learn today, and that is the quadratic formula. The quadratic formula is definitely the simplest method if you can remember that formula. The formula is x equals negative b, or the opposite of b, plus or minus, that means we're going to create 2 separate solutions, the square root of b squared minus 4ac, all divided by 2a. Yes, you must memorize the quadratic formula.
The quadratic formula is negative b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac all over 2a. Now you try. The quadratic formula is negative b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac all over 2a.
Okay, so the quadratic formula has the variables a, b, and c in it. So where do a, b, and c come from? They come from the quadratic equation itself. Remember, a is the coefficient of x squared, b is the coefficient of x, and c is your constant, your number by itself. So as we begin these, we're going to identify what is a, b, and c before we begin. We are going to plug in our numbers, and then I'm going to show you step by step how to simplify that expression to find your your solutions. It's possible, remember, that you could have 2 solutions. You could have 1 solution. It's also possible you end up with no solutions. Okay. Also, your quadratic equation, just like all of our other methods, must equal 0 before you can begin to use your quadratic formula. So on example 1, our a value is 1, our b value is negative 1, and c is negative 20. So we're going to use our formula. So it's the opposite of b plus or minus the square root b squared minus 4 times a times c. All of that is being divided by 2 times a. So when I plug all of my numbers in, I'm going to plug everything in using parentheses, okay? So I'm replacing the b variables with b, the a variable with a, and the c variable with c. You should have everything now written down. Grab your calculator, and we are going to start with what is underneath the square root sign, not including the square root sign, just everything that is underneath. So in your calculator, I want you to plug in open parenthesis negative 1, close, squared, minus 4, open parenthesis 1, close your parenthesis, open parenthesis, negative 20, close your parenthesis, enter, and that's going to give you a number. And the number it gives you is 81. Please double check and make sure that it gives you 81. All right, so right here, 2 negatives become a positive, so I have 1 plus or minus the square root. Remember, we did not include the square root here, so we've still got that sign. Underneath the square root is the number 81. And that's all being divided by 2 times 1, which was 2. Okay, let's continue to simplify. The square root of 81 we know is 9. So this is 1 plus or minus 9 divided by 2. At this point, we have 2 separate equations, okay? We have 1 plus 9 divided by 2, and we have 1 minus 9 divided by 2. 1 plus 9 is 10 divided by 2 is 5. That's solution 1. 1 minus 9 is negative 8 divided by 2 is negative 4. So my two solutions here are 5 and negative 4. Let's look at example 2. Example 2 does not equal 0. It equals negative 1, so I want to add 1 to each side. So my new equation is x squared plus 4x plus 1 equals 0, meaning A is 1, B is 4, and C is 1. So we're going to take all of those numbers and plug them into our quadratic formula. Use parentheses anywhere you are substituting a number. Here we're going to simplify. Grab your calculator. If it's underneath the square root sign, so all of this, not including the square root sign, plug that into your calculator, and what do you get? See, we have 4 squared minus 4 times 1 times 1. You should end up with 12. So I've got negative 4 plus or minus the square root of 12 divided by 2. Example 3. We'll start by adding the 5x to each side. 2x squared plus 5x plus 4 equals 0. So A is 2, B is 5, C is 4. Calculate what is under the square root sign. 5 squared minus 4 times 2 times 4 should get negative 7. So we've got negative 5 plus or minus the square root of negative 7 divided by 4. And last problem, we have 3x squared equals 7x plus 6. The equation has to equal 0. I am going to go ahead and subtract the 3x squared from each side. So I have 0 on the left here, and I have negative 3x squared plus 7x plus 6. It never matters which side your terms are on, as long as they are all on the same side. So A is negative 3, B is 7, and C is 6. Okay, please make sure you're paying special attention to the order in which we are simplifying this. It does matter, okay? We are starting with what is underneath the square root. So we'll do that. You can use your calculator. 7 squared minus 4 times negative 3 times 6. You'll end up with 121. So I have negative 7 plus or minus the square root of 121 divided by negative 6. Then we square root the 121. So I have negative 7 plus or minus 11 divided by negative 6, which gives me my two equations. I have negative 7 plus 11 divided by negative 6, and I have negative 7 minus 11 divided by negative 6, which will find me my two solutions. Negative 7 plus 11 is 4 divided by negative 6 is negative 0.7, and negative 7 minus 11 is negative 18 divided by negative 6 is 3. So those are my two solutions. The quadratic formula will tell you what are the solutions to the quadratic equation, but a piece of the quadratic formula will tell you how many solutions there are. Okay, so that's a distinct difference, how many versus what they are. The discriminant tells you how many solutions there are. The discriminant is what is underneath the square root sign. So that's the b squared minus 4ac. It's important to remember it's not It does not include the square root. It's just what is underneath, okay? That number that we found by just plugging everything into our calculator. So again, the discriminant can be used to determine the number of real solutions. Are there 2, 1, or none? Not what the solutions are. You'd have to use the entire formula to find out what those solutions actually are. Okay, we know that if there are 2 solutions, that means we're crossing the x-axis at 2 specific points. If there is 1 solution, we are just touching at a single point. And if there are no solutions, that means our parabola is not touching our x-axis. Okay. If your discriminant is positive, there are 2 solutions. Okay, if it's positive. If your discriminant is 0, there is 1 solution. If your discriminant is a negative number, there are 0 real solutions. Okay, so we are going to find the value of the discriminant, and based on that number, we will determine how many real solutions there are. So we have b squared minus 4ac. That is what the discriminant is. Okay, you're taking your b value squared, subtract 4 times a times c. Okay, a here is 3, b here is 7, c is 3. Again, your equation does have to equal 0. I set all these up for you. So I have, use parentheses, 7 squared minus 4 times 3 times 3. You can plug all that into your calculator. You can also do it mentally if you prefer. 49 minus 4 times 3 is 36. 4 times 3 is 12 times 3 is 36. 49 minus 36 is 13. My discriminant is positive, therefore there are 2 solutions. Let's look at example 2. A is 1, B is negative 10, C is 25. So I have negative 10 squared minus 4 times 1 times 25. Use your calculator or do it mentally. Mentally, we've got 100 minus 100. 4 times 1 is 1 times 25. 4 times 1 is 4 times 25 is 100. 100 minus 100 is 0. My discriminant is 0, meaning there is 1 solution. That is based off of what we just said right here. And lastly, we have A is 2, B is 6, C is 12. So I have 6 squared minus 4 times 2 times 12. 36 minus 96. 4 times 2 is 8 times 12 is 96. Subtract, I get negative 60. So there are 0 real solutions. So some of your homework is going to ask you to find the solutions. If you're finding the solutions, you must use the quadratic formula, the whole thing. If it's specifically asking you how many solutions there are, just how many, not what they are, you can use the discriminant to remember that. Okay, just for fun, one more time. What is the quadratic formula?
The quadratic formula is negative b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus